The third time she said it, I smiled too quickly. Not the real kind, the one with no teeth, no warmth, the one you offer when you're deciding if the line that just got crossed is worth turning into a war. We were sitting around the dining room table, just the three of us. Lauren, Dana, and me. Her friend was in town for the weekend, some conference in Midtown she'd built a visit around. They'd known each other since college, stayed in touch through every wedding and breakup and apartment move. Dana had always been the more grounded of the two, the one who saw things that Lauren often chose not to. The wine was open. The kind Lauren liked, dry, overpriced, something she always said finished clean. The dishes were mostly cleared except for Dana's half-eaten salad and the empty casserole dish I hadn't realized she'd brought out just for show. Conversation had meandered from travel to work to old stories about people I didn't know but was expected to pretend I remembered. Then Lauren said it again, something about how I couldn't ever just let things go, how I probably had a spreadsheet for what socks to wear, and Dana laughed, polite but softer than before. Lauren grinned, swirling her glass, clearly amused with herself. Her jokes used to have affection behind them, warmth tucked in the punchline. Lately, they felt like darts, targeted, practiced, and tossed with just enough charm to stay defensible. I let the silence settle for a few seconds longer this time before I said anything. No dramatic sigh, no clearing of the throat, just the words. "I don't think that's funny anymore." Lauren blinked at me, still holding the glass mid-sip. "What is?" "That, the whole obsessive control freak thing, especially in front of someone else." The smirk that had started to spread across her face froze halfway through. She tilted her head like she was trying to hear better, even though she'd heard me just fine. "Oh, come on, you're just being sensitive." It landed like a slap without volume. My shoulders tensed, not from anger but from the clarity of it. Not what she said, but how easily it came out, like she'd filed it away, like it was her shield ready for deployment. "You're just being sensitive," a phrase designed not to defend but to dismiss. I didn't look away, just nodded slightly. The wine in my own glass felt heavier in my hand. Dana stepped out from the kitchen then, holding the cork, her mouth parting slightly as if she wasn't sure whether she was interrupting something or arriving too late. She looked at Lauren first, then at me. And then, without sitting down, she said quietly, "I don't think he is, he's being honest." The room went flat. No one moved. Lauren's eyes flicked toward Dana, but she didn't turn her head. Instead, she gave a soft laugh and said, "God, you two should start a support group." Then she poured herself more wine, a little too full. A deflection, not a refill. Dana sat without another word. Her face had changed. No longer the easy guest smiling through dinner, but something more careful. She didn't look at Lauren again for the rest of the night. Conversation limped along for another 20 minutes, but the temperature had dropped. Dana tried to steer the mood with a story about her first apartment in Seattle, but it barely landed. Lauren kept checking her phone under the table like I couldn't see the light flash on her skin. I didn't call it out. I didn't say another word about the moment. But I watched her more carefully now. Not like a husband doubting, but like a man making an inventory of what was real and what was rehearsed. When Dana finally excused herself to bed, claiming jet lag though the night was still young, Lauren and I lingered at the table. She didn't speak, just scrolled through her phone with the kind of deliberate casualness that only made it more obvious. "You're quiet," she said without looking up. I thought about answering, thought about saying I was tired, or that maybe I just didn't feel like performing anymore. Instead, I asked, "What do you think Dana meant?" She finally looked up. Her expression was unreadable. She probably just felt awkward. "You kind of made it weird." There was no apology, no reflection. Just that cool, surface-level calm that told me she'd already rewritten the script in her head, and in her version I'd been too emotional, too rigid, too unreasonable. We went to bed without touching. She brushed her teeth with the door mostly closed. I folded the dish towel and wiped down the counter, not because it needed it, but because my hands needed something to do. When I came in, she was already under the blanket, turned away from my side of the bed. I didn't ask for space. I just took it. I lay there staring at the ceiling, my ears tuned to the sound of her thumb swiping across glass. The lock sound was faint. She was closing something. It wasn't the first time I'd felt like a stranger in my own home. but it was the first time I knew with certainty she liked it that way. And that silence Dana left in the room, it stayed. It lingered, stretched, settled between us like a fourth presence neither of us could acknowledge without collapsing the whole structure. I didn't say good night. And she didn't ask why. The morning after Dana's interruption, Lauren was all smiles again. French press coffee, eggs scrambled with chives, playlist humming softly through the kitchen speakers. She moved around the stove like a woman unburdened, barefoot in one of my shirts, humming a tune I didn't recognize. It looked like peace, at least at a glance. But the performance was too clean. There was a precision to it, the kind that only appears when someone's rehearsing how normal is supposed to look. I sat at the counter watching her slice toast, noting how she avoided eye contact a little too well. She asked how I slept, offered to pack Dana a snack for her conference. Everything was curated, pleasant, helpful, deferential. But when Dana stepped out of the shower with wet hair and a loose sweater, she glanced at me, not Lauren, like she was checking whether I still felt the weight she'd tried to acknowledge the night before. I did. After Dana left for the day, Lauren disappeared into the bedroom and emerged dressed for work 20 minutes early. She barely touched her coffee. When I asked if she wanted me to drop her off, she said, "I'll drive myself today. I might go for a solo drive after work, clear my head." It wasn't the first time she'd used that phrase. The first time had been weeks ago, a random Tuesday. She came home an hour later than usual claiming traffic, then turned the shower on without speaking for 10 minutes. I remembered it because of how quiet the apartment had felt while she scrubbed away something I wasn't invited to understand. That week it happened again, and again. Sometimes she left after dinner, sometimes before I got home, always with the same line, "Just need a solo drive." At first I believed her. Who doesn't need space sometimes? But patterns reveal things. And patterns without context begin to rot. Then came the nights she texted in the dark. I'd be lying in bed next to her, eyes closed but breath steady, and I'd feel the faint shift of the mattress, the flick of light from her phone screen. It wasn't that she was hiding it. It was that she was waiting for silence. She needed to believe I wouldn't hear it. That was worse somehow. It meant she'd weighed the risk and chosen it anyway. Once I opened my eyes just slightly, watching her thumb move quickly across the screen. Her expression didn't change. Focused, calm, a hint of a smile once or twice. She wasn't doom-scrolling, she was communicating, engaged. When I stirred deliberately, she locked the screen fast, placed it face down, and turned her back to me. "You okay?" she asked. I told her I was, but I was. Not because of the messages, I didn't have proof yet, but because of how familiar she suddenly was. The closeness between us had changed, everything felt rehearsed. Like she'd memorized the lines but no longer believed the scene. She'd lean into me during a movie, hand resting on my leg, but her body would go stiff the moment I turned to kiss her hair. When I reached for her at night, she'd respond like it was a task on her calendar. Something to be checked off. But it wasn't just detachment, it was what came after. Every moment that felt vulnerable would be followed by a hardening. A casual jab the next morning, a joke about how clingy I'd been. It wasn't always cruel. Sometimes it came dressed as affection, but it chipped away at something. It redefined closeness as weakness. Vulnerability as something to be used, not shared. I stopped asking, I started watching. Every concern I voiced carefully, gently, was met with that same tone. "You're overreacting." Or worse, "Not everything is about you." That one stuck. So I let her believe I'd dropped it. I became quieter, less expressive, more observant. I didn't accuse, didn't question. I just paid attention to the timing of her drives, to the rhythms of her texts, to the tone she used when she said, "I love you," like it was punctuation rather than conviction. And still, part of me wanted to be wrong. I held on to the hope that maybe I'd misread the distance, that stress or routine or the 1,000 tiny bruises of long-term partnership had dulled us without malice. But it was a fragile hope, and I knew I couldn't afford to live in it much longer. There's a difference between trust and denial was starting to feel like a luxury I couldn't afford. By the end of that week, I'd stopped pretending. Not outwardly. At home, I played the part with precision. Mornings began with coffee, light conversation, even a kiss on the cheek as she left for work. I asked about her day when she got back, listened without interruption, laughed when I was supposed to. She took it as a return to normal. She thought I'd let it go, but I hadn't. I'd simply decided to stop asking questions she was never going to answer honestly. Instead, I began collecting them. The first step was subtle, no software, no drama, just an unnoticed sync. We still had one of those shared cloud calendars, a holdover from earlier years when scheduling felt like partnership. She didn't realize I'd synced it to a separate device. It didn't show everything, just fragments. But fragments are enough when you know how to read silence. I watched for inconsistencies. Meetings that ended hours early, followed by no return home until late. Calendar entries labeled catch up or strategy talk with no corresponding emails or texts on our shared threads. One entry marked simply drive had a 3-hour block on a Tuesday. That was the night she came home smelling faintly of cologne I didn't wear. Next, I went deeper. We had one of those digital hubs for syncing devices. It was always logged in on her laptop. I set up remote access using an app she didn't know existed. Nothing invasive, just cloud data, app logins, image caches, messages that didn't always delete when she thought they had. And then I saw it. Not the break, not yet. But the thread that led straight to it. His name was Evan. I remembered it from an office Christmas party last year. Tall, clean cut, a laugh that sounded too polished. She de-introduced him as a work friend, said he was harmless, friendly. You'd actually like him, she'd said. Apparently I did not. The messages weren't daily, but they were consistent and layered. It began as emotional support, her venting about stress, about feeling underappreciated, about how some people needed everything scheduled and structured, how she sometimes felt like she had to ask permission just to breathe. The tone shifted gradually. Compliments, inside jokes, references to future events that didn't include me. Then one message from her to him stood out. It was from 3 weeks ago. I know it's wrong to say it, but talking to you feels like oxygen lately. That was the moment I stopped hoping I was wrong. It wasn't just emotional support. It was substitution, replacement. She wasn't confiding in a friend, she was performing partnership elsewhere. In another thread, she described our latest argument, though argument is generous. I'd said I felt distant, that I missed her. Her version twisted it. He's been overly demanding lately. Everything's a check-in now. I can't even exhale without it becoming a conversation. He replied, "That's not you. You need someone who sees you, not someone who monitors you." I reread that message more times than I should have. Not because of what it said, but because of what she didn't correct. There were no photos, no plans for hotel rooms, but emotional lines had already been crossed, repeatedly and willingly. At that point, I stopped needing proof. I didn't confront her, not yet. Instead, I pulled back emotionally in measured steps. I made sure she saw less of my disappointment, less of my effort. I became agreeable, easy. I smiled more. She took it as surrender. She even joked that it was nice to have you back again. She had no idea, because while she was busy choosing Evan as her safe escape, I was mapping the exit she hadn't thought I'd take. And now that I saw it clearly, without emotion, I began preparing for the part she never rehearsed. What happens when the one you thought would tolerate anything finally doesn't? It was 2 days after I found the messages when Dana reached out. Her text came mid-morning. "Can I call you? Privately." We hadn't spoken since she left our place, just a polite thank you text the morning after. I hadn't expected to hear from her again, not like this. She didn't waste time once I picked up. "I've been going back and forth on this," she said. Her voice was steady, but there was hesitation beneath it. "And I don't want to overstep, but I also don't want to pretend I didn't feel it." I waited. That night, when she said you were being sensitive, I saw something in her face. "It wasn't about what you said, it was about what she knew you might be seeing." I said nothing. "She's been talking to me about feeling distant from you," Dana continued, "for months, framing it like she was outgrowing the relationship, like you were," her words disconnected emotionally, too introspective, too controlled. At first I thought she was just venting. Everyone does. I stayed quiet still. But then it started to feel curated, like she was building a story, positioning herself as the one who tried everything while you refused to engage. I exhaled slowly. That part wasn't news. Dana hesitated before continuing. She's been laying the groundwork with her other friends too, subtly. Things like he just doesn't get me anymore and he's checked out but won't admit it. The kind of framing that makes it easier to say it just didn't work out with sympathy. There was a pause. I didn't know it had gone that far, she said, but I felt something was off. I'm sorry. I let the silence hang before responding. She's not just talking, she's writing a version of this where she's the one abandoned. Dana sounded tired. I think she wants you to end it so she doesn't have to be the one who left, or admit what she's already doing. A different kind of clarity settled in. All the dismissals, all the jokes at my expense. The sudden closeness with Evan kept quiet but in her mind already defended as emotional necessity. The way she'd stopped correcting his assumptions. She was crafting a narrative where my sensitivity wasn't a strength, wasn't even real. It was ammunition for her to use later. She wanted out. But more than that, she wanted to exit as the aggrieved party. That's why she didn't admit to anything. That's why she never escalated the connection with Evan into something overt. Not yet. Because if she could keep the lines blurry, she could claim innocence while nudging me toward looking like the villain. The controlling one. The fragile one. The one who walked away, but I wasn't going to give her that story. Because Dana had unknowingly handed me the final puzzle piece. Lauren didn't fear being caught. She feared being seen clearly. That's when I stopped watching her for slips and started preparing for the quiet, surgical dismantling of the version she was trying to sell. If she wanted a separation, she'd get one, but not on her terms, and not with her hands clean. I began the process without announcement. Quiet, clinical, exact. The first step was protecting the foundation joint assets. I didn't drain accounts or hide funds. I did it legally, transparently, with the kind of cold precision that leaves no fingerprints of panic. Half went to a separate account in my name. Documented, tracked, noted with timestamps and paper trails. Nothing deceptive. Nothing she could accuse. Just balance. Next, I consulted with an attorney, not for vengeance but for leverage. I needed clarity. Rights, protections, the roadmap she thought she'd steer alone. We built a file. Documentation, digital evidence, message logs, and a timeline. Dates, inconsistencies, recorded patterns. I had everything saved, secured in the cloud, backed up on drives in 2 different locations. At home, I moved with intention. I began transferring out the things that mattered, documents, personal items, irreplaceable keepsakes, a few each day, always subtly. A framed photo one afternoon, a drawer's worth of records the next. Nothing that left visible gaps. She never noticed. She thought I was settling, healing, giving up. I gave her silence, small smiles, even kindness. The more pleasant I became, the more convinced she grew that I'd accepted the new terms, her unspoken arrangement, that I'd swallow whatever she gave me so long as she stayed. That was her mistake. She confused quiet for weakness. She mistook dignity for passivity. And every time she made another offhand jab about how balanced things finally felt or how less tense the house had become, I simply nodded and wrote it down. Dana kept her distance after our conversation. She didn't check in, didn't leak anything to Lauren, but I felt her awareness whenever she visited again briefly that following weekend. She barely spoke to Lauren at all. And when she hugged me goodbye, she held on 2 seconds longer than necessary, as if apologizing for staying neutral when she knew neutrality wasn't deserved. Lauren, for her part, noticed nothing. She'd gone back to using the phrase solo drive without irony. 3 times that week, always in the evening, always returning with the same airy lightness that made me nauseous. I never asked where she went. I simply noted the time, logged the gap, added it to the file. She smiled more these days. Wore more makeup again. Posted photos online with captions that hinted at rebirth. Her voice changed, too. Brighter. Like she'd finally exhaled after holding her breath for months. She laughed more freely when we were around others, and I let her. Because I knew she believed she was steering the ending of our story. Rewriting the genre from tragedy to reinvention. But she didn't know she was walking through the closing act of a script I had already finished drafting. I let her plan our anniversary dinner. I even agreed to it. I let her think we were pivoting, that I was leaning into reconciliation. I bought flowers that morning, signed the card with care. She looked genuinely touched, even a little guilty. That guilt didn't last long. That night she left early for one of her drives, texting me she'd meet me at the restaurant. She arrived 20 minutes late, smiling and flushed with a vague excuse about traffic. She reached for my hand during dessert, and I held it. Because I knew what she thought this meant. She believed I was still auditioning for a spot in a relationship she'd already exited. But the curtain was already coming down, and I was done performing. She'd been preparing to leave, but only if I played the villain, only if I cracked first, only if I gave her the story she needed. Instead, I gave her kindness and silence. The night I ended it, there was no storm, no raised voices, no slamming doors. Just the sound of utensils on ceramic and the low hum of the kitchen fan. We'd finished dinner at home, nothing elaborate, just something prepped from a recipe she found online. She poured 2 glasses of wine, not knowing it would be the last time we sat like this. She wore her comfortable clothes, the ones she changed into when she didn't feel the need to perform. We were halfway through the second glass when I spoke. "You called me sensitive," I said. My tone was even. No accusation. Just the beginning of a line I had rehearsed only once, silently, all week. She glanced up, startled by the shift in tone. "What?" I met her eyes. "Back when Dana was here, you said I was just being sensitive." She looked uncomfortable but kept her expression neutral. "Okay," and I set my glass down slowly. "I've been paying attention. I didn't bring it up to argue. I bring it up because it's true. I am sensitive. I see things, feel things. And that's the very reason I couldn't pretend not to notice what's been happening between you and Evan." The silence was immediate. She froze, wine glass still half raised. "I read the messages," I continued. "I didn't need to see everything, just enough to understand that it wasn't just emotional support, it was substitution, and you painted me as the reason." She didn't deny it, not right away, just blinked once, then set the glass down carefully. Her voice came slow, soft. "That wasn't what it looked like," I nodded. "Then tell me what it was." She swallowed. "I was struggling. I needed someone to talk to. You were always so distant. Lately, you felt more like a calendar than a person. And Evan made you feel seen," I said, finishing the thought she wouldn't speak aloud. "That's what you told him. That talking to him felt like oxygen." The color drained from her face. "You read that?" I didn't flinch. "I read a lot more than that." She leaned back, arms folding slowly like she was building a wall with her own limbs. "So what, you were watching me behind my back?" "No, I was listening, after you stopped speaking honestly." She looked down. "It wasn't supposed to go that far. I let that hang there, let the words rot in the air between us." "It didn't have to go any further for me to see the pattern," I said. "The solo drives, the late texts, the emotional detachment followed by blame. You weren't just preparing to leave. You were preparing to make me the reason you left." Her jaw tightened. "That's not fair." I reached beside me, opened the folder I'd set near my chair. Inside, documents, preliminary filings, asset summaries, the email from the attorney I hadn't mentioned until now. I slid the folder toward her. "I'm not going to scream. I'm not going to throw accusations, but I'm not going to carry this for you either." She stared at the folder like it might bite her. "I want a clean process," I said. "No public theatrics. No fake stories about who gave up. I'll let the timeline speak for itself if I have to, but I'd rather we handle this with dignity." Her voice cracked slightly. "You're really doing this? You already did." In the corner of the room, near the kitchen doorway, Dana stood silently. She de-stopped by unannounced earlier, a bottle of wine in hand, claiming she wanted to say goodbye before flying back to Seattle for good this time. She'd seen the shift in my expression as I set the table. Maybe she knew this was the night. Lauren turned toward her almost instinctively. "Dana," but Dana didn't move. Her face was unreadable. "I told him the truth," she said quietly. "He deserved it." Lauren's face collapsed then, not into anger but into something worse, realization. She had lost control of the narrative, and now the only person who might have helped her manage it had stepped aside. I stood slowly, pushed the chair back, and said the last words I'd planned. "You don't respect sensitivity because it sees through you." Then I left her sitting at that table, wine untouched, folder open, friend watching. No screams, no scene, just a mirror she could no longer avoid. By the following week, the version she told was simple. He left, she told her circle. He just shut down and gave up. Some nodded in sympathy. Some messaged me awkwardly, half-hearted attempts at neutrality wrapped in faux concern. One even said, "It's just hard watching you give up so easily." I didn't correct them. I didn't explain the timeline. I didn't send screenshots or transcripts. I didn't upload evidence or write some long, defensive post trying to salvage my image. But not everyone needed me to. Because Lauren had forgotten one thing, Dana had a longer memory than most. And a quiet voice is often louder when it isn't defending itself. A few of her friends reached out over the next month. Not all, not most, but enough. One sent a message that simply said, "I heard the other version, I'm sorry." I didn't reply. The legal process moved faster than expected. Clean filings, documented records, no legal battles over responsibilities to drag things into the mud, just assets, timelines, and exposure. The court didn't care about emotional narratives, it cared about evidence. And the evidence told a different story than hers. Evan disappeared not long after the filing was served. No drama, no farewell. Just silence. The text stopped. His name faded from her updates. He never met her in the middle of the life she imagined with him, not when it stopped being an escape and started being real. I heard she tried to reach him once. Then again, then not at all. Dana, for her part, stopped defending her. Quietly, with grace, she didn't broadcast anything. She just declined invites, returned fewer calls, let the distance form naturally until it became permanent. I never asked her to. I never expected her to, but she did it anyway. And that silence, that's what finally surrounded Lauren. She posted less. Her captions grew vaguer, less curated. Her stories leaned nostalgic photos from better times, filtered memories trying to frame the past as peaceful. But it wasn't peace she missed. It was protection. She had confused my patience for permission, my silence for agreement, my presence for permanence. What she hadn't understood, what she never could, was that staying wasn't weakness, it was strategy, and leaving, that was survival. I never blocked her, never changed my number, never posted anything about the split. She remained unblocked not because I was open to reconciliation, but because I wanted the door she once exited to remain visible. And eventually she used it. One message. "Can we talk?" I didn't delete it. I didn't respond either. Some people say closure is a conversation. I disagree. Sometimes closure is the sound of your phone staying silent after everything has been said. One of us left, but the other one lost.